Today's talk is focused on two areas. The first is Tesla's stock price is down on news that the driver for the superior earnings was perhaps an accounting trick, and that there were issues with 39% decline in U.S. sales. That was revealed in the Q1. The second thing we addressed today is, for the first time, we had a chance to get an extended interview with Tesla's chairman, Robyn Dedholm, in sort of gathering up a perspective of how she's working with Elon, how the company is running, and how that working relationship is going to affect Tesla going forward. We also have our usual health tips, and we look forward after 15 minutes to say hello, as well as field your questions. So we'd appreciate it if you'd hold them until then. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We actually are going for the water this time because long conversations don't facilitate good sound, so we want to make sure that works as well. I wanted to thank all of you for taking time out. Just a reminder, if you like our show, please take time to like and subscribe. We also would appreciate any support you can provide on Patreon, from $1 to any amount that you're comfortable with or able to. So, as you know, by the way, our B-roll today is the Model Y introduction. So you'll see some of that video if of interest, and you can also find it on Tesla.com. So today's conversation really focuses on the fact that we kind of wanted to do an update. We're expecting in the next day or so that large investors are going to weigh in on what they think of Tesla's earnings. And so, given that the stock price kind of fell from the mid 300s down to about 315 on new news, we definitely wanted to cover this and make sure that you were sort of aware of kind of what's going on and why. Let me grab my notes here. So one of the comments that was shared is that the sense was that the way Tesla generated the profit was by some accounting shifts that enabled them to sort of present the numbers that they had better than expected. And so that, $10, $15 hit was part of that. The second issue that was raised is that there's a 39% decline in U.S. sales, and then those sales were mostly picked up by Europe and China sales, so that the hit wasn't that great, hence declining stock price. We're kind of following our Tesla process, where when news hits, there's an immediate run for the doors or decline in stock price, and then there's a chance to really dig through those numbers. And then again, the large institutions will roll in and sort of pick up their shares from there. The interesting note that we wanted to make about this situation is that, one, we think it's fun to watch how big companies can operate, because if you have a broad balance sheet, you can play all kinds of games that allow you to control the numbers you present to the public. So there's a huge tradition of this being done by many big companies in the United States, in some ways finding a way to store cash on the balance sheet so that if you want to tweak the earnings a little bit, you can sort of bring that cash out, and it has an impact. I think that, and so therefore that's my thought on that. But I don't think that I don't think it's a big deal. And the main reason is that the open question is Tesla selling cars, number one? Number two, on a global basis, if they have a global footprint, is there demand and growing demand for those cars? And I think there's no doubt the answer to that is yes. So I think that it's an immediate alarmist issue, but I don't think it's material in terms of where the company is going, et cetera. So hats off to Elon for using all the techniques he has available to control kind of what's going on short term with the stock. The bigger issue, I believe, is, what are we going to see from China in terms of numbers? It was fascinating to listen to the conference call because the stuff that really matters, nobody asked the questions. For example, do they really have the battery supplies to deliver 3,000 cars a month initially and then 10,000 a week for China? And if they do, that's a bigger piece of news than whether or not they used accounting to get the numbers that they delivered. So yes, it's an issue. Yes, the stock price is down, reflecting that issue. I'm really looking forward to what the mega analysts have to say, and we'll find that out starting at the end of this week, so the beginning of November of 2019. I think what those analysts will say is the same thing I'm saying, which is what's going on with China in every way, and how does that affect Tesla's numbers. And speaking of China, one of the fun parts about covering Tesla is we get a chance to see bare-knuckled strategy by all companies and other entities that want to crush Tesla in terms of their ability to control the news and really sort of sticking it to Tesla every opportunity possible to get a reduction in the stock price for whatever reasons that is. And so I think that the bigger deal here is, one of those items that pops to mind in this regard is it was highlighted that Tesla's cars are going to the lowest end model is being delivered at $50,000 per in China to start, versus in the United States, the $35,000 car was the initiating vehicle. So that is a $15,000 gap. The one thing to think about with this, though, is that one, it's a lower cost of production in China, and two, there's something I call Chinese math. And what that is that if you have a $50,000 car and the Chinese government gives you a $14,000 tax credit, that's now a $36,000 car. Now, clearly Tesla would sell a lot more cars if they started out with a $40,000 or a $35,000 car and then got that discount, because then you'd have a 25K Tesla and that demand would be bananas. But the way the numbers are working out currently, a $36,000 car by Tesla in the Chinese market is, we think, pretty attractive. And once being in production, based on the demand size for a number of reasons, we believe that, Tesla's going to have a backlog and shortage. So, a wish question that came to mind is Tesla has stopped reporting its backlog numbers or order numbers prior to sale. And so we're looking forward to finding out, more about what that backlog is. We don't know, but you can see it show up in what the sales might be. So speaking of the 10,000 units a month, the second portion of our show today was focused on Robyn Dedholm. She's the new chairman of Tesla. And I was really fascinated to sort of get a good understanding of sort of where her mind was and how good the relationship is with Elon in terms of going forward. I actually, as I discussed with you, sort of grew up in Silicon Valley, graduated from Stanford University, and then stayed and had an opportunity to work in a situation much like what is happening between Elon and the current chairman. Basically, you had a young CEO, and that young CEO, wasn't operating management as was expected or wanted by senior managers, senior owners and other stakeholders. So they brought in a very senior female executive, and much like Robyn, and the CEO made an effort to make her life as miserable as possible. I left before finding out she quit, but I would not be surprised if she did, because the CEO kind of bridled under the scrutiny of somebody being superior when they didn't own stock or help build the company, et cetera. So I thought it was an interesting circumstance. But basically, what's implied is that, Ms. Dedholm indicated that beyond the board meetings, she actually speaks with Elon on a regular basis, and their working relationship has been good. I suppose my biggest takeaway from their interaction that we've been able to experience publicly was it seemed like when it came to Twitter, Elon had kind of developed this kinder and gentler Elon that wasn't sort of tossing huge firebombs off of his Twitter account that were affecting the stock dramatically. And it kind of felt like she was one of the big impactors on this. And I found it fascinating to learn that one of the board, Ron Barron, who's forecasting a $1 trillion Tesla company and investing in that regard, indicated that one of the interesting elements of this conversation is that there's a board member who actually did a chart to show Elon's tweets against the stock price. And it highlighted the fact that every one of those tweets were destructive to the stock price. And he sort of covered that with Elon/Robyn. And all we have to say is that we've seen a reduction in firebombing tweets from Elon. And I think it's good for the stock, good for the company, and helps things to move forward without a lot of drama. Let me run through some highlight notes that we had from the CNBC interview with Ms. Dedholm. She's a former Toyota executive, so I actually thought when they chose her as chairman, it was kind of strange because she didn't have any auto experience, but that was not the case. I like the fact that she speaks with Elon regularly. I think this is a good deal because it kind of, one, helps them to build a rapport and a relationship, and two, enables her to help him sort of bake in good structural management process that might emanate from her experience. One of the notes I thought was fascinating that she made was that she had a talk about the current structure of the management team for Tesla. And what we thought was interesting about this one was that she indicated that there are many young replacements for many senior executives that are leaving, but those individuals are prepared in their focus subject areas, and that they were doing a good job. So I thought this was an interesting comment because, there's one of the things that is going on here or happens for some companies is that you can either use experience of senior executives to make a decision about what to do, and for a lot or some younger executives, they can make a decision what to do and not have the benefit of experience. So you end up with all these expensive errors that you could have saved money on by just getting more experienced people in position. So the other note that she didn't talk about is that the last time we checked, Elon had 17 different people that were reporting to him, and he's only a half-time employee. So I just thought it was fascinating that you would have, she didn't talk about this ratio of many senior executive seats sitting open after folks had moved on, and perhaps you have their subordinates who were relatively young, sort of stepping in a as-needed role to make those decisions. So I'd say that this is a bit of a concern, but what's beautiful about certain startup settings is when companies are doing well enough, you can get away with a lot of sins, and definitely Tesla's gotten away with a number of them. Another note that she made was that there would be that startup of about 3,000 vehicles a month, and then a move to 10,000 vehicles a week by Tesla, and that the factory is ready for that. So this was a comment that I found really interesting because I guess some chairmen are more hands-on. Obviously, she's not. She's former head of the audit committee and then moved over to the chairman of the company. And there was an interesting note here because what she said was, Elon told me that we're going to 10,000. What she didn't say was, I went and talked with our senior managers as well and confirmed the 10,000 before I announced it. And so this is a big deal because kind of the company is swinging on that right now. And the reason is that if, in fact, we do get that 10,000 a week from China, it is an awesome news item because all of a sudden that's the key to the next 100% growth in sales and revenue for Tesla. So stay tuned as we get more information on this part of what's going on and how it's going to work in terms of who's providing the batteries and are enough batteries there to provide this 10,000 number. And then the follow-on question is, if you can produce 10,000, are there the buyers for those vehicles? So there's a whole list of questions that spins off that 10,000 number that big time affects the stock. Hence why the earlier part of the show where we were discussing, accounting tricks and a sudden shift to profit end up being no big deal because you're sort of earning your way out of any issues. And so, it's an interesting also note that the way she was hired, or the nature of how the hiring occurred, was to really put some professional management above Elon that would help the company run better. And it kind of seems like that's happening in the conversations she's having with Elon, but it's not a situation where she's laying down the law about what corporate governance is and corporate process is, and then sort of daring Elon to run her over. She seems to be very much inclined to be a sort of work with person and not a Gestapo or police person that puts Elon in handcuffs and forces what he's going to do. There's two other items that came to mind. Was I think China is a very interesting situation for Tesla because one of the things that's going on right now is that there are these tiers of how customers view companies and how they interact with them. So one example is there's something called the early adopter. So if something new comes out, there are certain people that will buy it immediately, and their experience is sort of wafted out into the next tier of buyers, and that series keeps happening to more and more buyers. Tesla in the United States right now is somewhat of a mature company in terms of what it's doing. And one of the overarching issues, both domestically and internationally, for Tesla has been spare parts. And now that the China facility is set up, it really, I think, represents a huge potential for not only spare parts being produced for the China market, but also spare parts until they're using all their production space to be produced and shipped to international partners. Because I believe that where we're at right now is Tesla's growth is being handicapped by the lack of dealers / location footprint that the dealers would allow, as well as service. And so there's a block of customers that are sitting there saying, we're not buying this thing until I can reliably get it repaired. And things like long delays for spare parts, et cetera, are part of what's slowing down sort of the next adoption rate in the United States. So if you could have sort of global spare parts addressed from the China production, this would really go a long way towards allowing parts being produced for the U.S. market to be concentrated here. So the problem or the opportunity there is China could really represent solutions in many ways to the challenges that Tesla's having. So, the other thing I found interesting was listening to Ron Barron discuss interaction with board members and the process they're using for sort of training Elon into a different direction. And so I think this is a good circumstance to sort of get a feel for how this process is working towards Elon sort of graduating towards, I want to say, better management style or better interaction with the investing public. The one last item that we were sort of rolling through today is that our next show focuses on comments made by a professor at NYU. We didn't report this when he originally talked about it, but he had forecasted an 80% decline in the stock of Tesla based on governance issues, et cetera. And so we're actually looking forward to our next show because particularly after the last earnings and seeing where Tesla's at, he actually has sort of retracted and indicated that his assessment of things was was moving in that direction. I got a chuckle because Noob indicated that Bob Lutz wanted to say hello as well, and I just thought that was funny. Noob, I think you'll be surprised. We have some, well, that brings up an issue for us, and that is this. What a lot of people don't, one of our goals for this show has been to introduce sort of what the process is behind the scenes on some of the big companies. So one of the big issues is that anytime a CEO makes a comment, it goes globally. And if you're a subordinate to that CEO, if you make a comment that's incendiary, you could get fired. So basically, most people in power positions at very senior levels avoid making comments because they don't have stock control like Elon does to say what they want and get away with it, based, from a lot of different entities saying fire that person and they can't feed their families. So Bob Lutz for us represents, yes, he makes sort of dumb comments that are interesting to follow up, particularly as they go the opposite direction of what he stated. But the other thing that's going on here is that there's structural process that a lot of folks have come up with, and they're implementing that process. And until the old process doesn't work as well, they maintain those processes. So our Bob Lutz discussion is driven by, that was until there's new different, you can take the data of what's happening to conclude that they're maintaining whatever it is, the approach. And so we actually have a couple of Bob Lutz related shows that are coming down the pipe. And what it relates to is the fact that, there's what are called compliance cars, and the vehicles that are produced for compliance, the goal was to, meet certain goals defined by our regulators, but the goal was not to deliver a great product and refine that product to make sure customers love and want to buy more of them. And so, this is part of what we call the Bob Lutz process. And it's demonstrated by the fact that the Bolt is a decent car in places like Europe where there's a backlog. They're not selling them. And the reason is because, one, they're not there anymore, but two, they're really trying to appease California regulators and not trying to sort of cannibalize their primary profitable business. And this kind of brings up maybe our final thought or process of the day, that is to play around with what we call funny money. What's fascinating to us is that, you could argue that the earnings that were generated might have come from an accounting change, but there's some interesting funny money numbers coming in. If you look at this from last year, it was announced that between GM and Fiat, Tesla got $300 million from them using the electric production of Tesla to cover over the sales of their high-polluting SUVs. And so as we get into 2020 and particularly 2021, the European market starts to do the same thing, where the penalties to the large automakers for producing huge SUVs that pollute more is that they have to produce and sell countervailing EVs. And so most of the big guys like, not so much VW, but definitely with Daimler and BMW, they're pretty much sitting on their hands and waiting until they have to do it before they cannibalize sales heavily with decent quality EV products. So, there's an example of, Bob Lutz's process maintained, hey, we're doing compliance only, and generate as much revenue as we can until we get to that point and not cannibalizing our primary business. And so this is kind of seeding the electric market to Tesla for a longer period. And it's questionable if they'll be able to grab those customers back after they finally start producing something decent, because the Tesla edge is getting so far. The last item we wanted to note is that something interesting is happening, and it's playing into shows that we have coming up, and that is that based on firmware improvement, Tesla just announced that they're actually pushing they're pushing out at the long range Model X, or Model S, they're at 373 miles, and then it pushes the X up to 325 miles of range. So, and they were able to accomplish this by a firmware delta, and we think it's really amazing because what happens with when you bake in these range enhancements as we enter things like the semi-truck, and what 4 batteries worth, or 3 or 4 power packs that would go in a Model S or X might do in that marketplace going forward. So I think bottom line is it portends some really exciting things, and part of the stuff that we're looking forward to cover going forward, because the competing firms are not able to do this. So we didn't see a lot of heavy questions come across, Noob and others. Obviously, we saw the hello from Donovan, Noob, Fred, Michael in Australia. Thank all of you for taking time out to say hello and visiting with us live. We actually look forward to your comments and questions post-show. We're definitely working on quality enhancements on a regular basis, and we take your input in that regard definitely seriously. Please remember to like and subscribe, and support on Patreon would be appreciated. We look forward to rolling into some of the other topics we've mentioned to you in our next show in a couple of days. This is a reminder, don't forget the 25 leg lifts of a day to maintain the strength of your quad muscles. Also, please note that you want to not eat within 2 hours of going to bed, preferably before. And finally, I wanted to say hi to Fred. Begrijp je steeds nog Ausfahrbeinen in German, au revoir, French, Lehithroat, Hebrew, Hoda Hafez, Farsi, Hedjdu from Donovan in Sweden, Strazvice, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, and in Jamaica we say, enough respect, walk good man. Thanks once again for joining us. Just a quick note here is that, we're sort of evaluating, looking at picking up shares in the pre-IPO stock of SpaceX. So we've seen a few emails from you. You have to be what's called an accredited investor. So we'd encourage you to read up on what that is, so that, the vetting process, we minimize the time for that. And then we can, look at, sort of making an impact in that space. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight once again. Teslafaninsight once again. Thanks once again for joining us. We really look forward to further interaction and your comments and input. And it definitely influences what we cover. Gamaliel, hasta luego. I don't do that from Mexico because in America, probably 20% of the population is from Mexico. We eat in Mexican restaurants all the time, so we love the country. So Spanish is a second language here in the U.S., and all of us have no choice but to speak it. Y yo puedo hablar un poquito de español también. No hay problema. Y me gusta la comida. It's de Mexico también. So hasta luego. And by the way, I would love to, in our notes, ask, do you see a lot of Model S's and 3s in Mexico? Tesla hasn't made it a focus destination for vehicles, but is there demand there? Do customers like it? We'd love to hear back from you in the post-show comments. Have a great day, and thanks for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight.